The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense, thick with an air of anticipation. Everyone had gathered, eyes locked on the figure standing at the front, a towering figure in legal circles, Chief Justice John Roberts. Known for his sharp intellect and commanding presence, Roberts was rarely challenged in any meaningful way. But today was different. Today, he was about to meet someone who would not back down, someone who would redefine the very idea of intimidation. At the heart of the courtroom, sitting confidently in her chair, was Jasmine Crockett. She was young, ambitious, and brimming with a quiet intensity that few had witnessed before. Her reputation was quickly growing as a legal force, a person who wasn't afraid to take on even the most powerful figures in American law. And today, the challenge before her was no small matter. She was about to face off against one of the most respected legal minds in the nation. As the case progressed, it became clear that Roberts wasn't about to let this young attorney slip by unnoticed. With his piercing gaze, he leaned forward, his tone cold and measured. "Ms. Crockett," he began, addressing her with the kind of formality that only a Supreme Court justice could deliver. "Your arguments seem, well, let's just say, unconventional. Are you suggesting that the legal precedent, as established by the highest court in the land, is somehow flawed?" The room went still. It was a loaded question, one designed to make her second-guess her position, to make her falter under the pressure. The words hung in the air like a challenge, a test, of her resolve. Everyone in the courtroom, especially the seasoned lawyers, was waiting for her to respond. Would she crumble under the weight of Robert's authority? Or would she find a way to turn the tables, to prove that intellect and integrity could rise above intimidation? Jasmine Crockett's eyes narrowed slightly, her posture unwavering as she looked Roberts dead in the eye. The moment was electric, as if the very air itself had thickened in anticipation. But what came next would leave everyone stunned. Instead of the hesitation that so many expected, Jasmine's voice rang out clearly, with a confidence that shook the room. "Your Honor, I'm suggesting that the law should always evolve with the times. Legal precedents should serve justice, not tradition." A murmur spread throughout the courtroom. Was she really challenging one of the most respected legal figures in the country? The audacity! But that was exactly who Jasmine was, unafraid to stand her ground, even when it seemed like the entire world was against her. Judge Roberts raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting this response. He had anticipated a moment of weakness, a stumble, but what he got was something far different. Something far more dangerous. Jasmine was not backing down. Instead, she was pressing forward with a clarity and resolve that only those with the most exceptional legal minds possessed. And so, the challenge was set. But what came next was beyond anyone's expectations. Could Jasmine hold her ground? Could she back up her bold words with action? Or would the weight of the legal world come crashing down on her? But Roberts wasn't done. The seasoned judge, sensing a crack in her confidence, pressed further. His voice dropped, becoming even more pointed, his gaze more intense. "You believe the law should evolve? But what happens when you're the one who is wrong? When your interpretation of justice fails, leaving chaos in its wake?" His words hung like a threat, calculated to rattle her. The courtroom was silent, the audience waiting to see how Jasmine would respond. Would she cower? Would she falter under the weight of his question? Or would she prove, once again, that there was nothing she couldn't handle? The stakes were higher than ever. The question on everyone's mind was clear. Could Jasmine Crockett overcome this? Could she survive the onslaught of one of the most powerful figures in American law? Jasmine's response would set the tone for the rest of the case, and the rest of her career. The moment had arrived, and the entire courtroom was on edge. What would happen next? The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. Everyone held their breath, waiting for Jasmine's response. Judge Roberts had just thrown down the gauntlet, trying to shake her resolve with his carefully crafted challenge. His words, though intended to rattle her, had only fueled her determination. As all eyes stayed fixed on her, Jasmine Crockett took a deep breath, poised to make her mark in a way that no one, not even Roberts, had expected. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady, but with a fire that was impossible to ignore. "I don't claim to have all the answers, but I do know this: the law should serve the people, not the status quo. It must evolve, adapt, and reflect the changing times. If it doesn't, then we risk becoming obsolete, like the very injustices we're trying to fix." The words hung in the air like a bold declaration. It wasn't just a response to Roberts. It was a call for change, a rallying cry that echoed throughout the courtroom. Those present, the seasoned attorneys, legal experts, and even the audience watching from home, could feel the weight of her words. This wasn't some young attorney just trying to make a name for herself. No, Jasmine Crockett had just laid down a principle, one that could change the trajectory of the case, and perhaps even the way people viewed the law itself. Judge Roberts, ever the stalwart figure, didn't flinch, but something in his eyes betrayed a momentary flicker of uncertainty. He had expected her to waver, to show a crack in her confidence, but that didn't happen. Instead, she had turned his challenge into a rallying cry for legal reform. And for a brief second, Roberts seemed to recognize that this wasn't going to be as easy as he'd anticipated. But then, in a move that many thought was calculated, Roberts leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. He tried to regain control of the room with a subtle shift in posture. "Ms. Crockett," he said slowly, his tone now laced with a hint of condescension, "you speak of the law evolving, of adapting to the times. But let me ask you this: how can we trust a legal system that is constantly in flux? Do you believe in stability, or do you simply wish to tear everything down in the name of progress?" The question, though still framed as an intellectual challenge, carried a sharp edge. It was a direct attack on her argument. The room tensed once again as the audience waited for her response. The tension between them, a clash of ideologies, was palpable. Roberts had tried to paint her as reckless, as someone willing to sacrifice stability for the sake of change. But was he right? Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her gaze unwavering. "Stability," she said, her voice measured and calm, "is important. But without justice, what good is stability? The law must evolve, but it must evolve with purpose. Otherwise, we risk upholding systems that hurt the very people they are meant to protect." There it was. Jasmine had turned Roberts' question back on him. Instead of defending stability for the sake of tradition, she had reframed the debate entirely. It was no longer about change versus stability. It was about justice versus stagnation. The courtroom seemed to shift in that moment, as if the entire case, the entire argument, had just taken on a new shape. Judge Roberts, who had spent years at the pinnacle of the legal system, now found himself facing a challenge he hadn't prepared for. A legal mind not just daring to question the system, but offering a vision for how it could be better. And yet he was still the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Would he let this young attorney, no matter how brilliant, get the upper hand? For a moment it seemed as if the room held its collective breath, waiting for the next move. Would Roberts push back with the force of his years of experience? Or would he be forced to acknowledge that Jasmine Crockett was, perhaps, not just a young upstart, but someone who was reshaping the very nature of legal debate? The stakes had never been higher, and as the seconds ticked by, it became clear that this wasn't just a case about law. It was about power, influence, and the ability to redefine the boundaries of justice itself. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence as Judge Roberts processed Jasmine's words. She had done it. In a single sentence, she had turned his challenge into a profound statement on justice and reform. It wasn't just her legal knowledge that had impressed everyone in the room. It was her ability to think on her feet, to navigate the highest levels of legal argument with clarity and purpose. The air seemed thick with tension, as all eyes were now fixed on Roberts, waiting for his next move. For a moment, the Chief Justice said nothing. His face, typically so composed, betrayed no emotion as he stared at Jasmine, weighing her words. But behind the stoic exterior, there was a battle of wills. The seasoned judge, who had seen countless cases, now found himself in unfamiliar territory. Was this young attorney truly challenging the foundation of the legal system? Or was she simply a product of youthful idealism? Finally, Roberts spoke, his voice low but carrying a certain authority that could not be ignored. "Ms. Crockett," he began, "you may talk about justice and progress, but you've yet to show how your vision aligns with the reality of our legal system. It's easy to speak in ideals, but the law is a framework, one that has stood the test of time. If you want to tear it down, what will you replace it with?" The question seemed simple, but it cut to the core of the issue at hand. He was daring her to explain herself, to justify her stance, but the underlying tone was clear. Was Jasmine Crockett truly prepared to upend the legal framework that had shaped the nation, or was she simply a reformist without a clear path forward? Jasmine met his gaze without hesitation, her eyes locked onto his with a quiet intensity. The entire room was watching, waiting for her to falter or to explain herself in a way that could diffuse the tension. But that was not her style. She wasn't here to apologize for her beliefs or to back down. "If you want to talk about reality, Your Honor," she replied, her voice unwavering, "then let's talk about the reality of a system that disproportionately affects marginalized communities. Let's talk about the reality of a justice system that sometimes serves the powerful, rather than the people it was meant to protect." Her words were direct and cutting, and they struck a chord with everyone in the room. No one had expected her to be so blunt, so unapologetic in her challenge to the very system that Judge Roberts represented. But this wasn't a moment of disrespect. This was a moment of clarity. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just challenging Roberts. She was challenging the system itself, and she had no intention of backing down. There was a shift in the courtroom. For a brief moment, the audience felt the weight of her words. Was Roberts truly blind to the flaws in the system? Had the law become so entrenched in tradition that it had lost sight of its original purpose? Jasmine wasn't just asking for reform. She was demanding it. And in that moment, the tension escalated even further. Was Roberts willing to face the uncomfortable truth she had just laid bare? Judge Roberts, now on the defensive, narrowed his eyes, his jaw tightening as he processed her response. He wasn't used to being challenged so directly, especially not by someone so young. For the first time, doubt flickered in his mind. Was his vision of the law truly aligned with justice, or had he been protecting an outdated system? But he couldn't afford to show weakness. He couldn't allow a young attorney to dismantle everything he stood for. Not here. "Not now, Ms. Crockett," he began, his voice steady but laced with a quiet anger. "You speak of reform as if it's a simple solution, but you fail to see the full picture. If we discard the legal frameworks that have served this country for centuries, what are we left with? Chaos? Disorder? I'm afraid that's not the reality of justice." The room seemed to hold its breath again. The tension between the two was palpable. On one side, the esteemed Chief Justice, a man with decades of experience. On the other, Jasmine Crockett, a young lawyer who had just turned his argument on its head. Who would emerge victorious in this battle of legal minds? Could Jasmine continue to push her vision for reform, or would Judge Roberts remind her that some things were beyond change? The outcome of this showdown would have far-reaching consequences, not just for this case, but for the future of the American legal system itself. Judge Roberts leaned forward, his fingers steepled together as he stared intently at Jasmine. It was clear that he was not going to let her go unchallenged. The stakes had been raised, and he was determined to regain control of the situation. His voice, though still calm, carried an underlying edge as he responded. "Ms. Crockett," he began, "you make some compelling arguments, but let's not forget that the law is about balance. It's not about extremes. It's about finding a middle ground that protects the rights of all citizens. Your idea of reform is admirable in theory, but the question remains, how do you propose we implement such change without causing irrevocable harm to the very system we rely on?" The question lingered in the air, challenging Jasmine to offer a concrete answer, a solution that would reconcile her vision for reform with the reality of maintaining the rule of law. Roberts was clearly testing her, hoping she would stumble, unable to provide a practical solution that would bridge the gap between idealism and the world of legal realities. But Jasmine wasn't intimidated. She knew this was the moment where her true strength would come to the forefront. She was more than just an idealist. She had spent years studying the law, understanding its intricacies, and most importantly, its failings. This was her moment to show Judge Roberts and the world that her vision was more than just a fantasy. "Your Honor," Jasmine began, her voice now stronger than ever, "the law, as it stands, isn't balanced. It is skewed in favor of the wealthy and powerful, leaving the most vulnerable to fend for themselves. You speak of balance, but what balance is there when one group of people has access to resources and legal representation, while another is left with nothing? This isn't balance. This is a system that perpetuates inequality." Her words hit with precision. They were a direct attack on the very foundation of the legal system that Roberts had defended for so long. For a brief moment, the courtroom was completely still. No one moved, no one breathed. It was as if the entire world had paused to process what had just been said. Jasmine's words weren't just a critique. They were an indictment of everything the legal system had stood for. Judge Roberts, his expression tightening, tried to maintain his composure. He had spent his life defending the integrity of the law, and here was this young attorney, so sure of herself, challenging everything he had come to believe in. He had to admit, if only for a moment, that she had made a compelling case. But could he allow her to dismantle the very system that had shaped the nation? "You speak of inequality," Roberts said, his voice colder now. "But are you suggesting that we should dismantle the entire system and start from scratch? Do you truly believe that is the solution to the issues you've raised?" It was a direct challenge. Roberts was pushing her to the extreme, hoping to make her appear radical, even reckless. If he could corner her into defending such an extreme position, he could discredit her. But Jasmine Crockett was no novice. She knew how to navigate these kinds of traps. "Judge Roberts," she said, her tone unwavering, "I'm not suggesting we dismantle the system. I'm suggesting we rebuild it, brick by brick, so that it serves all people, not just the powerful few. We can have a legal system that holds people accountable, that truly protects the rights of all individuals. It's not about throwing away the law, it's about making it what it was always meant to be, just and fair." The clarity in her voice was undeniable. She had just turned Roberts' attack into her most powerful argument yet. She wasn't asking for anarchy, she was calling for accountability, for the law to evolve in a way that worked for everyone, not just the privileged. The audience, the courtroom, and even Roberts could feel the force of her words. This wasn't an attack. It was a vision. And it was a vision that demanded attention. For the first time, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. The tension that had been hanging in the air for so long seemed to dissipate, if only slightly. Even Roberts, despite his firm stance, seemed to be reconsidering the conversation. He was the one on the defensive now, and he knew it. But would he back down? Would he admit, even for a moment, that the system he had defended for so long could be improved? The clock was ticking, and the pressure was mounting. Jasmine Crockett had just turned the tables, but the battle was far from over. The silence that had settled over the courtroom now felt like a weight, pressing down on everyone in the room. No one moved, no one spoke. All eyes were on Judge Roberts, waiting for him to respond, to retake control of the situation. But the longer he sat there, the more it became clear that he was struggling to find a way to counter Jasmine's argument. He had expected her to falter under pressure, to make a misstep in her response, but instead she had stood tall, unwavering in her beliefs. Jasmine Crockett had done the impossible. She had not only held her ground against one of the most respected legal minds in the country, but she had also made him question the very system he had spent his life defending. The sheer force of her argument had left Roberts speechless, his mind racing to catch up with the new reality she had presented. And then finally he spoke. "Ms. Crockett," Roberts began, his voice softer than before, though still laced with authority, "I have spent decades in this profession, defending the laws of this country, ensuring justice is served, and I will not pretend that your words do not have weight. You have made a compelling argument, but I remain steadfast in my belief that the law is a framework that cannot simply be rewritten without consequences." It was a concession, albeit a reluctant one. Judge Roberts wasn't admitting defeat, but he was acknowledging the validity of Jasmine's challenge. It wasn't the full victory that many in the room had hoped for, but it was a step forward, a recognition that the system, while not perfect, could no longer be ignored or treated as untouchable. Jasmine, for her part, did not gloat. She had not come here to win a personal battle against Roberts. She had come here to make a statement, and that statement had been heard loud and clear. "I respect your years of experience, Your Honor," Jasmine replied, her voice steady. "But respect isn't enough when it comes to real change. I'm not asking you to throw away everything you've worked for. I'm asking you to see that the law can be better, that we can work together to fix what's broken." There was a moment of pause. Then Roberts leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on her. For the first time, there was a flicker of admiration in his eyes. He wasn't sure if Jasmine was right, if her vision could ever be fully realized, but one thing was clear. She had earned his respect, and that, in itself, was a victory. The tension in the courtroom began to dissipate. The audience, who had been holding their breath for what seemed like hours, let out a collective sigh. The battle had been fierce, but Jasmine Crockett had emerged as the victor, not by overwhelming her opponent, but by shifting the entire conversation to a place where real change could begin. As Judge Roberts stood, signaling the end of the session, Jasmine knew that her words had made an impact. The system may not change overnight, but her voice had been heard. And that was the first step toward a new kind of justice, one that didn't just rely on the status quo, but one that was built on accountability, fairness, and a commitment to improvement. The audience rose to their feet, applauding the courage and conviction of the young lawyer who had taken on the establishment and come out on top. Jasmine Crockett had not only held her own in a high-stakes legal battle, she had also proven that sometimes it takes a new perspective to truly make a difference. As she walked out of the courtroom, Jasmine knew this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long, but she was ready. After all, she had just taken on Judge John Roberts himself, and won.